Welcome to Platform Builders, a series where we talk with founders and operators who are turning strong businesses into scalable platforms. Across the blue-collar services industries, from HVAC to home services, from fire, life, and safety to refrigeration, private equity is backing these operators to consolidate highly fragmented industries.
But building a platform isn't just about acquisitions. It's about integrating companies, building systems, developing leaders, and scaling operations without breaking the business in the process.
Each episode, Yassin and I will sit down with platform leaders and other experts to understand what it actually takes to scale through M&A.
And with that said, let's get into today's episode.
What happens when the successful local contractor and owner suddenly becomes a platform? More locations, more acquisitions, more complexity. And if the systems, culture, and operations aren't ready, growth can break any business that you're trying to scale. We've all been there. That's a challenge platform builders face every day. Today, we're joined by Brenden Van Buren, president of Promax Systems, which is recently partnered with Sawmill Capital. I know the Sawmill gentlemen really well. Brenden helped grow Promax from a strong local contractor into a multi-unit platform. Brenden, great to have you here.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, it's exciting to finally have you on the podcast, and it's our first episode, so it's a special start to the new season.
Yeah,
I'm honored to be the first guest here on this podcast.
Yeah, you're episode 1. So from now on, you know what that means, Brenden. You get the most views because you're
heard most often. That's for sure. So hopefully I don't say anything wrong that messes this all up.
No, I think you're great. So hey, Brenden, before we get into the business side of it, because you were an owner before joining Sawmill, could you just walk us through a kind of a brief story and history of Promax?
Yeah. So Promax was originally founded in 2006 by 3 founders, Russ, Randy, and Todd. They grew the business over the next dozen years. I reached out to Russ actually via a letter, much like a private equity company. I was looking for contractors. My family's background is heavy highway construction. So I grew up project managing large jobs, been visiting job sites since I could walk, but wanted to go do something on my own. So sent out letters to go acquire a business, and Russ responded. So it was a fortuitous event that he read my letter, something in it clicked, and he gave me a call. That was back in 2017. He called me. About 9 months later, in June of 18, I acquired the business from them. Over those 12 years, they grew from the 3 of them to 53 employees. Russ was very hands-on though. And you see it a lot in businesses, kind of 50 employees, right? That's the limiting factor. And if you're too hands-on, you really can't manage more than 50. And so that's about where Russ was. I think that's why he reached out. He saw my letter and he's like, boy, I'm overwhelmed. I can only handle so much of this. And so he responded to the letter. Todd, one of his partners who still works for us, he's actually retiring in a couple months, but he jokes about that. He got that letter and he was tired of pulling his hair out. And so he responded to me. And so that was what started this whole endeavor, is a fortunate response from Russ.
Well, good to see you still have a full head of hair.
Well, I'm still only 37, so
yeah, I mean, but that means you've been scaling the process as well because you have all your hair.
And very, very interesting, Brenden. Why did you decide to acquire a business instead of like starting one from scratch? Like, what inspired that?
I think first off, I'm just not smart enough. So I didn't have a brilliant idea. I knew construction and had learned about entrepreneurship through acquisition in grad school at Carnegie Mellon, and was mentored by a couple of professors. And they're like, hey, this is something you could do. And so I was like, yeah, I think I can do that. I could run a business. I just can't, I'm not brilliant enough to come up with an idea. So I went and explored entrepreneurship in a different manner.
Awesome.
And that was the first business you ran yourself?
Yeah, I'd run some business units or I'd run some projects. So I was a large, heavy, on my projects, there were probably more than 50 employees, but I'd never, directly managed every single employee. But my projects, it's a couple of very large bridge projects across the state. of Pennsylvania.
And how did you raise the funds to do the acquisition? I mean, did you have a capital partner, a private equity sponsor? Like, how did you?
I have friends and family. So
Wow.
out of grad school, I started this little search firm, Generational Transfer Entrepreneurs, and we reached out to a whole bunch of businesses. We bought 3 businesses through that. Promax was the second business. Another guy, Tom, he bought a sleep apnea business, and then my buddy Gabe, he's still running a HVAC cleaning business. So, but that was started with some friends and family money. But my biggest investors, my dad, my grandfather, and a local family from my hometown.
They must believe.
I don't know. You were poking at yourself there about not being an entrepreneur, but you definitely were an entrepreneur, just a different version of it.
Just not brilliant enough to come up with a $1 billion idea.
Sometimes people take good ideas and make them great. That's okay, Brenden. That's okay.
Mm.
So, you take over in 2018. Promax starts to grow, adds a new level of complexity, and now a couple of years ago, I think it was 24, 25, you sold the sawmill. I can't remember the exact date, somewhere in that range.
May of 24.
Yeah. So then you're like, what's the epiphany point for you that says it's time for private equity to be okay in my picture? Like, what were you thinking about?
So I'm going to back up a couple years before 24. So in 2018, I bought the business. 2019, I did a small bolt-on acquisition that was about 30 minutes north of us, J&M Fence. And then in 23, I ran into another business, Able Fence, and I was thinking about buying them. And actually, I went and checked in with an investment banker buddy of mine, and I was like, I don't know, I'm thinking about doing this acquisition. Does it make sense for me to do it myself? It's a little bit bigger than the ones I've done. Well, bigger in terms of bolt-ons. The company is still a little smaller than Promax, but how should I finance it? And so he and I went back and forth on it. He's like, Brenden, you should do it yourself and show that you can do these yourself. But I understand you and JP is my COO. You guys want to learn in this process, but doing this once on your own on a little bit more scale will frankly give you more value and show you that you can do it. So I got some bank financing. I enjoy the process of buying businesses. I mean, I've done it several times now. So I know that's something I like to do. So I bought Able. We bought that in 23, went back to my investment banker buddy. Actually, he started bugging me. He's like, hey, how's that acquisition going? And so he kept coming back to me, but we looked at it. I talked to JP and my CEO, and we were exploring, what do we want to do with our life, and how do we want, what's our next step? And we were doing well. We could have just continued, slowly built the business, learned from ourselves and learned from mistakes that we were doing on our own. But we decided, hey, how could we do better? And getting some institutional money from a private equity company seemed like they would also then provide us kind of that guidance and mentorship. My dad has been a great mentor to us, but we just were like, hey, how do we go do this more to scale? And bringing in a partner seemed like the best way to do that. And frankly, also allows us to grow our people and do a lot more. If we just stayed at a steady state, slowly grew, our people would have slowly gotten promotions over the next 20 years. And, it probably would have been great, but our people wouldn't have grown very quickly if we were doing it that way. So we wanted also to accelerate the growth paths of some of our team, and this, bringing in more sophisticated money seemed like a good way to do that. I know one of the things we're kind of talking about is just, hindsight and, lessons learned. So I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but it was, you also learn, you think you're building a platform and you realize how many more things you have to prove upon as you're doing that. Bringing in someone else that can kind of give us those insights was something we thought would be very valuable.
What I'd say is you're a good kind of just getting to know you and talk right now, I'd say is you're a good example of how operators should start to think about their businesses if they're thinking about a transaction at some point. The idea of testing acquisitions and enjoying doing that yourself, even to a small scale, it's okay, right? You're learning about the process of doing that, and then understanding at some point for your team, the growth piece becomes important to them, right? There's the important for you and important for them. right? And
Yeah.
I think you bridging that and then coming to the kind of ultimate conclusion that you need to bring in a private equity partner in this case, but an investment group in this case to help accelerate your growth. Like, kudos to you for doing that.
Exactly. And you had mentioned the mentorship and someone who's been there, done that to guide you through the process. Is that why you decided on Sawmill Capital? Was it the money? Was it the relationship? Like, how did you end up deciding that Sawmill is the right owner for you, Brenden? That must have been a very big decision.
Yeah, I went and interviewed all of the people I could. I think Sawmill told me no one has ever interviewed as many of their portfolio companies as we had. AP and I got on the phone and we interviewed, we had 4 very competitive offers. So money really wasn't a deciding factor. And so we went and we interviewed all of them. And Frank, all of them had different pros and cons. And so we just kind of explored that and who would we work best with. And Sawmill's team sounded really good. They sounded very committed to us. I think that's probably what won them at the end of the day, was just their commitment to what we were looking at. And we thought there'd be a good cultural fit. And so that's why we ended up picking them at the end of the day. It's been a great experience thus far, and they've been very good to work with from that standpoint. The one thing that I would say is you don't know what you don't know. And so you end up learning a lot that you didn't know about building a platform after you do it. So like, you think, we got a good ERP, we got a good process for this, that, and the other thing. And at the end of the day, you're like, you start diving into it and you start learning, hey, we probably do need a new ERP. We probably do need to go do this or that to make ourselves a stronger platform. And Sawmill's been very helpful in that process.
Yeah. So, Brenden, that never stops. Someone who's doing it for 9 years, I tell you that piece of it, like, I learn every day. I learn every single day. Just kind of before we move on to like acquisitions and stuff and some of what I'll call the details, did anything change for you after like I know the Sawmill guys, as you know, but like for you specifically, how involved did you feel they got with you? How did the strategy work the same or differently? Did they give you resources? Like, just maybe a 2-minute like thought process on the interactions with Sawmill, that like first 0 to 1 year.
Yeah. So from a resource standpoint, just because it's the easiest thing, they have a very good network, right? And so if there's like, hey, the first thing we already knew, and this was in our diligence and, was well advertised as we had our investment banker, but we knew we needed a CFO. And so right off the bat, they brought in a very good headhunter and helped us find a CFO. If I was to do that on myself, I probably never would have found the caliber person that we have. Also, being private equity backed allows you to find better candidates too, because that's more interesting for a CFO. And so we, right off the bat, we did that. The next thing they did is they brought in a couple different strategic consultants for us to talk to and interview to help us go build out a strategic plan. And some of this is the platform building, some of it's how do we want to approach M&A. But we had a really good offsite with a few of the people from Sawmill, Travis and Casey specifically, and then kind of the key leadership team that we have. And we kind of created these 5 pillars of growth that we're working towards with the consultant. Some of it's on platform, some of it's on M&A strategy, some of it's on organic strategy. But we kind of created here's the 5 pillars and here's how we're going to work towards growth. And now we've been working on executing that. And that was from one of the resources that they helped bring in. So it wasn't someone that was internal to the staff, although they do have a really good market research team in-house. It was, here's our network. Some of the private equity firms have a lot of that stuff in-house and other ones outsourced. And so it varies a little bit on what you were looking for. Their reason for doing it is everyone needs something a little bit different. And so this allows you to kind of find the people that mesh best with you as far as consultants or advisors. Everyone has a different pitch. So I can't tell you, if it's any better working in a different manner because I haven't done it. But they brought in a guy, George. He helped us kind of put this strategic plan together. We outlined it. Now we've been working on executing towards it.
It's awesome.
And did the strategy change, like pre-Sawmill, post-Sawmill? Like, did you change end markets, your technology roadmap? Like, what changed in your strategy?
I would say our technology roadmap, and then a little bit on the we ironed out more of the characteristics of what makes a good acquisition for Promax. Sawmill's and this was another reason we went with them, is they're very culture focused in terms of finding the right fit from an acquisition standpoint. There were other private equity firms that were like, hey, we're just going to go buy everything. You find us something, we'll buy it, and we'll figure out how to do integration and everything later, which I know works for some people. This just seemed like a good, and so we kind of ironed out, here's the characteristics we want to see in an acquisition. So I personally probably hadn't thought of that as much. And so that was something they definitely brought to the table in terms of what we're looking for. And then there's all geography. I think we were pretty much on the same page as the whole time. So I don't think anything's really changed there. We did kind of strategically map out what that might look like, more so than just kind of in our heads. But at the end of the day, it's here's the next spot. Here's kind of the next spot. If something happens that causes us to jump a spot, here's the reasons why that would happen.
So you work with Sawmill. Sounds like you did acquisitions prior to Sawmill. So have you done acquisitions since the close?
So we bought 3 businesses last year. So
wow.
We're into it with, so that makes kind of the total companies, if you include Promax, 6 at this point. So we worked with them. 2 of them were a little larger. 1 was fairly small, but we were in the middle of integrating all of them, pretty far along on a couple of a little further to go on a few others, mainly because of us trying to also build out an ERP at the same time. And so that just kind of makes it a little bit different on the phases of integration.
Yeah. Did any of these, I'd say, not go the way you wanted them? That's not a call out thing. By the way, I have some in my history that didn't go well. But it's more like, hey, something you didn't know until you did it. And then you're like, hey, now I learned something, and something maybe to go forward and improve on in my process. Just curious.
Yeah. I think everyone has something that you always do something wrong, and you try to learn from it, and you collect a long list of lessons learned. We've definitely got that. I think my biggest lesson learned in the whole process, and this is why we've held out on a little bit on the integration of the most recent one, which was finished in October, is just integrating the ERPs. Is if you don't have a solid ERP to back up your system, it makes it much more difficult to integrate the accounting side. Operationally, we've been doing all the work to integrate operationally. We're still doing some stuff on the sales side, but that's one, is you got to have that solid foundation. We thought we had a pretty good process and plan, and even Sawmill's initial diligence showed that too. But after diving in and trying to add additional companies to the ERP platform that we had, we realized it's just not what we thought was doable wasn't. So that's something we're hopefully a couple months away from fixing, but that's something. I think the other thing is just making sure everyone understands the why some of the processes are done in the ways they are. So the smaller company we bought, we're still dealing with some accounting related. So they were small enough, we just rolled them into our system. It was like, okay, you're just doing what we're doing. I'm not sure the why's fully understood. It definitely wasn't initially. And even simple stuff like, why are we putting a firewall in? It's like, okay, well, we're a much bigger company. We're at much more risk now.
Yes.
Got to have this firewall. You can't just have an unsecured Wi-Fi network sitting there. And so there's things that, really, especially smaller businesses just have no idea about. And you got this whole cyber plan that you need to execute on every time you buy a business. And most businesses have no idea why in the world you're executing on this cyber plan. It's like, well, all that did was cost us money. You had to buy this firewall. You brought an IT guy in. And now it feels like my internet's slower. It's like, okay, but like, here's the reasons why. And I don't think we went through the why very well with some of them. And so I think doing that, and making sure that everyone feels a part of the team, I think we've done that better and worse at different places. But I think that's the biggest thing, is just trying to get people to understand the why.
Yeah. So like for me, when we do like that acquisition integration, the first 90 days, some of that is like you're blocking and tackling your financial systems, aggregating the P&Ls, putting a budget in place, making sure all the bank accounts are aligned to your CFO. Like there are is it similar for you? Is there some nuances in the first 90 days?
I'd say it's very similar. Like you said, there's the blocking and tackling items, like making sure if it's an asset sale, all the trucks are transferred right away. Or if if it's stock sale, making sure that the insurance plans line up and that everyone's with the same boat. And so there's definitely the small blocking and tackling items. And to me, it's also, and this is where I think we've done better and worse, it's getting the people on board. You got to do the logistics, literally get them on board and make sure they get paid the next week. But there's the making sure they're on board and they understand who Promax is, why we partnered with the company, especially the field guys, getting them bought in. And we do the simple stuff like making sure everyone gets Promax shirts and feels like they're part of the team. But there's getting them to see, we're trying to become the benchmark in the industry. And as we did diligence, we felt like the company that you work for is a great fit to help us become the benchmark in the fence industry. And so those are the soft things that have to get done that are the hardest to define how to do.
And Brenden, you talked about you got more dialed in on the culture diligence and how you assess culture fit. So how do you assess it now? Or how do you assess it in your most recent acquisitions? What did you do differently this time around in assessing culture? And how do you go about that cultural integration? Like you said, there's the low-hanging fruit, sending a t-shirt out and making an announcement, but how do you get that buy-in, especially from the field?
Yeah. For one, I'm not going to say I'm perfect at this, so my answer is probably still in process. I think the first thing as far as determining if there will be fit is look at the processes that they're doing. I tell a lot of people that go and try to do entrepreneurship through acquisition like I do, I always tell them, if you don't get along or there's something that just feels off in the relationship with the business owner, chances are there's not going to be a cultural fit, right? So like culturally, I am who I am. Culturally, that person is who they are. And so if you start feeling like, hey, I don't know if this is going to be a cultural fit because of what this person said related to that, it could be something they're doing a business process that just doesn't feel like it's right for you for whatever reason, or their hobbies just seem completely off, or their personality just seems completely off. And it's kind of like dating, right? So there's really good people that should date and they're just not the right fit, right? And so it's the same type, like you as a business owner are trying to go and date these other business owners and see, hey, is this the right fit for me? And if something feels off, it could be perfectly fine. Their business could have a great culture. It's just not going to fit with your culture. I mean, there's simple things like, hey, here's how we do processes. Let's make sure there's a line and can integrate with each other. Simple things like, how are we managing projects? Is it way different? But there's also just like soft things like, here's how communication happens in the business. And if that just seems way off on how culturally you've built the business, then it's going to be, doesn't mean it's impossible to integrate. And we're very early and young in our process, I'd say. And so as a result, if you don't get that right, it can cause a lot more work and strain on the business. Yeah.
So when because it's lean, so you have and you bought a few businesses. I assume there's some organic growth of all of that has to happen now, right? It's one of your pillars you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
How do you do all of what we just talked about for 30 minutes and grow the business without breaking it?
So this is what at least I try to do, is unclog the bottlenecks. Going back to lean manufacturing, there's several books on bringing lean into different industries, but I think you look at what the bottlenecks are. So whenever I bought Promax the first time, Russ was the bottleneck, right? Which meant as I transitioned into his role, I immediately became the bottleneck. And so how do I unclog each bottleneck in the system? In 2020, I knew I needed to start unclogging myself I started the process in 19. It took me a while to recruit the person, but January 2020, I hired the person who's going to start managing the schedule and do some other things that I was doing to unclog myself as a bottleneck. And so, it's the same type of thing in these businesses. And so you got to find out what is their bottleneck. If it's sales, is it operations? To me, it's usually one of the two, and then you unclog one and then the other one becomes a bottleneck, and you just kind of keep unclogging the next bottleneck.
Yeah. Hey,
go ahead.
Brenden, the way I think about this, Brenden, too, is there is a little bit of a priority exercise we all take on as leaders of these businesses, which is my team knows, like, I'm a rule of three, like a number three guy. Like, if we have any more than three priorities, we have one too many. Like, I'm fine with finishing one of them and picking up a new one. Like, I'm all for that.
Yeah.
But once you start getting let's just say 5 or greater priorities, you effectively have no priorities, right?
I think that's a great way to look at it.
Yeah. So how do you get them to prioritize? How does Brenden talk to his team and say, here's the 2 or 3 things I want you guys to really focus in on, so those bottlenecks kind of get cleared up?
And so that's going back to the strategic pillars that we created. It's okay, here's the things we want to be executing on. I think I'm a big task list guy, right? And so going to your priorities, here's the tasks. These are, unfortunately, you might have 10 items on there. Okay, we got to go pick the 3 that we're going to work on. And honestly, I really like to have 2 in most cases. It's okay, here's the 2 things you're working on. It was actually interesting. I was on the phone earlier today with an MBA who was looking for an internship. And he was like, hey, I want to be involved. I'd like to do some stuff. And it was like, whenever I hire an intern, I never give them more than 3 projects for the whole, go into your whole roll of 3s, because they're not going to be able to tackle more than 3 things during that summer internship. And they're not going to be big priorities, but it's the same type of thing. You got to, okay, here's the tasks, the items, the projects we want to be working on. And here's your first 2 usually that you need to be focusing on. And then we solve those and we go to the next 2. I think it's very similar to what you're saying there. But it's working with them. And one of the things I've been doing with my team is I have one-on-ones. And so it's every month I think I've got 5 direct reports right now. And so my 5 direct reports and although I've switched it, we now do walking meetings with AI recording us so that it can keep the notes and go with the tax list. But we go over, okay, how are we doing with these, 2 or 3 items that you're working on, and what resources can I help you with, or where do I need to point you in the right direction? And so I think the monthly one-on-ones help us ensure that those priorities are set and that they're working on the right things. My theme for the year for the team is, and I think as we've been working with Sawmill, I've been trying to hit perfection too much. And so perfection is the enemy of progress. That's my big theme for the whole team this year. Let's make sure we're executing. If we have something, we got to try. If we have a plan, we got to try it out. We're not going to hit perfect in that plan, but let's go start executing on, to me, from a sales perspective, we'd never had a sales process ever. Our bids, everything we did was just organically or, with our website, leads came in. So someone would have us bid something. One of the things we know we can do better is we could start selling. We could start bringing on new GCs. We could go out to market. And so my sales guy, he knows his priorities right now are following up and finding new GCs. Those are I want us to figure out how are we following up with everybody and how are we bringing on new customers. And those are the 2 things that he's working on. And so it's coming up with those similar things with each team member and where that process is with them.
That's excellent. So, Brenden, you talked about priorities, tasks, strategic planning. Like, what is the operating rhythm right now? Like, so you do annual planning, then you break it up by quarters, and then you have weekly meetings with your leadership. Like, what does the operating rhythm right now looks like at Promax, and how do you bring everyone across these 6 companies to kind of make sure that communication flows?
So each of my leads, right, they've got their team that they're working with. And so, or at least each of the people that report direct to me, they've got their team. So they're then having similar one-on-ones with their team to go over their priorities, depending on where it is. Like JP, my COO, he has all the branch managers right now reporting to him. Over time, we probably have regional managers, but so he's working with the branches and making sure that we're slowly bringing everyone into what we're deeming the Promax way, right? So we've got processes and they have different processes. And so, okay, how do we morph and make it so we're all doing things the same way, or at least very similar, how we're doing, whether that be bidding or running a project or laying out a project. And so JP, for instance, he's working with his team in that process to make sure that they're following those steps. Once again, we're not doing everything perfect, and that's not what we want to do. I just told you we're not doing anything perfect this year. We're going to make sure we're executing. But the point being, he's meeting with them, going over the process, making sure that we're slowly morphing into the same processes across each company. Once again, doesn't happen overnight, especially with an acquisition. We're trying to find ones that are close already. So hopefully it's not a big shift, but it's making those small incremental shifts. Where we're a little bit in the middle ground is there's some stuff that we're building out with the ERP and some stuff that we're building out with our CRM that are going to influence those processes. Making people change twice isn't necessarily something we want to do either, but there's simple things that we can execute on. So it's working on those simple things that are going to be the same in the current process and the future processes is what they're working on.
Yeah, that kind of leads to a question. What do you typically, you buy these businesses, right? And there's always this harmony of what do you leave as the legacy kind of secret sauce of the business and what do you centralize, right? So how do you think about that? Like what, at least today, and that evolves over time, by the way, like how do you feel like you buy a business on day one, here's the things that you'll probably integrate or put into some kind of a shared resource group, and here are the things that we want to leave alone so that that business has some personality in front of a customer?
I guess to start out, we like to learn a lot from the businesses. Like we talked about, we're fairly young in this process. And so some people are doing stuff better than we are, right? So you don't want to mess up. If they're doing something better, that might be something that needs to get integrated into that process. And so a little bit is learning from the existing company on what their processes actually are before you go make big sweeping changes. Clearly, if there's something they're doing completely wrong or that's just not going to work or is in a gray area in terms of what they're doing compared to taxes or something, then you're clearly going to fix those things right off the bat. The other things, it's a little bit of a learning process. And even whenever I bought Promax, I didn't change anything for 90 days. All I did was follow the business owner around and make sure I didn't screw anything up. Now, we're trying to get accounting on board, and we talked about the first 90 days. There's a bunch of stuff you need to do, like transfer truck titles and make sure insurance is proper and get consents on all the contracts and things along those lines that you got to execute on. The other things, the softer skills or the cultural stuff, you are learning a little bit before you go make a change and really screw something up. Our COO, and we still have the ability to do this, he ends up meeting a lot of the guys. So making sure that people are comfortable with us and field guys like us and stuff along those lines is something that we do a fair amount of in this process. Getting them all on the same page and seeing that we're just normal people too is something that we really try to focus on. But to answer the question is, you got to be careful. You got to make sure that you aren't changing something that is their secret sauce. And so right now, we generally keep everybody's name. And so that's a little bit of that. I think over time that could adjust, but everybody becomes a division of Promax. Now, in our industry, the company we bought up in Syracuse, no one would know what Promax is, but they've had 47 years worth of brand recognition. Going and messing that up, especially on the residential side, could be catastrophic. And so making sure you're not doing something along those lines. But 2 years into working with, or actually 3 years now, working with Able Fence, we're very rarely using the Able Fence name. They're Promax. And so, it's a slow process of some of these items that get moved.
And Brenden, across 6 acquisitions, right? So you had 6 owners or more. Has some integrated into the business, absorbed by the business? Like, how did you think about how to reposition the owner in that business, and how did you find them the right role?
Yeah. So Russ, the person I bought Promax from, he's retired. Although I was at an event a few weeks ago, and he and I talk fairly often. He's actually helping us with an idea that we have in terms of a process. And so he's actually being our guinea pig and kind of testing it out for us right now. So even though he's retired, he still helps out here and there. One of the owners retired and actually ended up coming back in just like a general role. They just were too bored at home, and so they're working in the shop. This is the second company we bought. It's a fairly small business, but he came back and is working 28 hours a week or something for us because he was bored. The next one is retired. I like to kind of before we go buy them, it's coming up with a plan on what they want to do. And if what they want to do doesn't sync with what we want to do, also probably not the right acquisition. So we work on aligning with that. Generally, it's trying to move them out of the specific role that they had as we bought the business, because otherwise it makes it a little hard to integrate, in my opinion. If we're trying to bring in their operations and they just stay in the exact same role, everything ends up just defaulting back to what they're always doing. And so it's finding them a role that lines up with what they want to be doing long term. And that's what we've been working towards. And some of them have great value within their business. And this goes back to making sure we're not messing up their secret sauce. If there's something secret sauce wise that they're doing that they can go teach the rest of the business, that's something we really want to be doing. The most recent business that we bought, there were 3 partners. One has retired. The other 2 are shifting their roles slightly in terms of what they're managing. But the previous owner was kind of the overall manager. So a lot of that just happens by default as they leave. So it's varied significantly. I'd say 50% have retired and 50% have stayed. And a lot of the minority partners have stayed and taken on much bigger roles.
Do you think about kind of lessons? Because the audience here is people like us, Brenden, that are, people getting into it, people are further along, somewhere in the middle of those two. As you think about it, like using your rule of 2 that I heard you say earlier, maybe putting you on the spot a little, like what are like one lesson you learned that was like an aha moment, a real positive as you've been doing this the last couple of years, and maybe one that you're like, that's a minefield that I wish I would have known about ahead of time?
Yeah. So I'm going to start with the minefield because it's probably the easiest, right?
Yeah, it's always easy.
This is just, I wish prior to partnering with a PE firm, there's a couple more things that I would have just put in place first. But the problem is I didn't know what they were until after I did it, right? So it's hindsight, but there's probably a couple of things that I just wish I would have solved before partnering with. And that could be, we mentioned the ERP, but there's just some process things that I think would have been nice to have gotten situated before we started doing what we're doing. I really do like having additional people to pick their brains. So like bring in Sawmill. Travis and I talk at least once a week, and just having someone else to pick their brain. They've also brought in a business coach for me, and we actually just COO JP, he's now in Vistage because we felt like there were really good growth opportunities for him there. I think from a partnership and a working with them, that's gone fantastic. Whether it's AHA or going really smoothly, I think that's been great. And exactly what we were hoping for in terms of learning and doing all those things. There's just a couple processes. Probably what I wish I would have done is, since I got docked for it whenever I sold anyway, I wish I would have just had a CFO 2 years earlier. I could have found as high of a caliber one, but having that person already in place probably would have fixed a bunch of the other problems that I'm talking about. And so had I done that 2 years earlier, which I got hit for, the investment bankers, like, they're going to want a CFO. We got to pull that out of here. And so I already put their wages in and got hit by that on my EBITDA. I may as well just had them for the past 2 years.
Yeah, taking credit for it.
Yeah.
They look at that as like a inverse, a dis-synergy essentially on day one.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You need that role. Hey, just curious, you're in commercial, I remember right?
Yeah, 85% commercial fence.
Yeah. Was most of the ahas of the setup around like POC accounting, some of the WIP adjustments, things like that, or were you doing that beforehand?
So we were doing it. What we were doing was much more hands-on. So our CFO's kind of been like, okay, we're going to do something based on labor and do something much more percent complete. I did mine all by hand. I went through every single job, every single month to do WIP. And so I feel like mine was probably a little bit more accurate, but at the end of the day, the pluses and minuses on the other side, they all equal out. And so all that extra work that I did, you get a pretty similar number. So I would say it's been helpful doing that. I think a lot of it is just integrating the process into the accounting. So like one of the things we're doing is trying to make sure that as people enter time, they can see things and they have better KPIs. And so that's a lot of things that the CFO's been working with myself and JP on, is making sure that people have better data. And so that would have been something really helpful to have 3-4 years ago before partnering with Sawmill. One thing that, and this is something my dad and I talk about a lot, and this is something I understand why they need it, but you end up spending all this time collecting job data, and then that doesn't always get used, but the private equity company wants to see all this job data because they know that's what the next company is going to want to see. If I knew it, or if my team knew it, I didn't need to go see every single one of those. So it's kind of counterintuitive, but there are clearly KPIs that are very helpful for them to see. And then there's some job data that you end up spending a lot of time and money collecting that I'm not sure how useful it actually is at the end of the day. But
yeah, that doesn't change either. Industry does not change. I'd say, like, reacting to that a little bit, I think what's important for us as operators is that we define the metrics. They look to us as experts, right? We have to define good KPIs and the rationale for good KPIs to get to the outcomes that we want, or that they want too. Like, there has to be aligned interest there. So I always tell people, like, get in a room and figure out what those KPIs are, and then remind everybody, hey, we went through the exercise of these KPIs being the ones that are going to drive the business. If there are new ones we want to introduce, I'm always open to that, but let's make sure that they're going to give us something, because we don't want data for data's sake, right? But I agree with you. You'll still continue to get those.
Yeah, phenomenal growth, Brenden. I want to congratulate you for the work you've done. I mean, in a few years, you've doubled almost the business. And building a platform is rarely a straight line. And while acquisitions can accelerate growth, the real challenge, as you mentioned here, is how do you build an organization that can absorb that kind of growth without losing control? So I want to thank you for joining us and sharing your experience. Honored to have you, our first guest, and looking forward to continuing the conversation offline.
Yeah,
yes,
I appreciate you guys, and I'm honored to be on the first episode of this. It was fun.
Brenden, it was awesome talking to you, and thanks for sharing your experience and being open about it. You have an industry guy out there, so if you ever need any help, feel free to reach out.
Yeah, thanks, guys. I appreciate it. It was great talking to you.
Fantastic.
Right,
Thank you, guys.